It was no longer just about precision strikes, but about a prolonged strategy of overwhelming force designed to crush the opponent's entire military system. So why did Washington bring the B-52 into this war? And what does its presence truly reveal about America's long-term plans in the Middle East? If you're interested in deep, yet easy-to-understand analysis of military affairs and global geopolitics, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and follow along with us. And now, let's begin today's story. There are moments in war when a single image can say more than hundreds of pages of reports. No lengthy briefings are needed. No urgent meetings of diplomats. Just one image appearing in the sky can be enough for the whole world to understand that the situation is changing. And in the conflict unfolding between the United States and Iran, one of the most symbolic images is the sight of B-52 Stratofortress bombers flying across the skies of the Middle East. For many people, the B-52 is not a symbol of modern warfare technology. It doesn't have the stealth coating of the B-2 Spirit, nor does it possess the cutting-edge electronic systems of fifth-generation fighter jets. In fact, it is a war machine more than 7 decades old. An aircraft designed during the Cold War, when the world was divided into two tense opposing blocks. But that is precisely what makes its appearance so significant. In many U.S. military campaigns, the B-52 is not the force that opens the fight. It is not the surgical instrument used to make the first precise incisions into an enemy's weak points. That role usually belongs to stealth aircraft like the B-2 next-generation fighter jets or cyber attacks aimed at paralyzing defensive systems. The B-52 appears only after the door has already begun to crack open. If the B-2 is the scalpel that makes the precise cuts in the opening stage of a campaign, the B-52 is more like a massive sledgehammer. It doesn't arrive to open the door. It arrives to smash everything that remains behind it. And so when B-52s began to be spotted flying over the region, many military analysts immediately understood that the American campaign had entered a different phase, one less surgical and far more indicative of a prolonged crushing operation. But to understand why the appearance of the B-52 carries such significance, we need to go back to the moment when everything began, the very first hours of the war, when this military campaign was launched in a completely different way, with precision that was almost surgical. Before the B-52s began appearing in the skies over the Middle East, the military campaign carried out by the United States and Israel had unfolded in a very different way. The first hours of the war did not resemble the massive bombing raids of conflicts in the last century. There were no long formations of dozens of aircraft flying straight into enemy airspace. Instead, the opening phase of the campaign consisted of a series of precision strikes calculated down to the minute. The battle truly began in places most people could never see. Inside electronic warfare command centers, cyber attack systems were activated. Iran's radar networks were disrupted, communication signals were distorted, and command systems began receiving incorrect data. In modern warfare, blinding an enemy's perception can sometimes be even more important than destroying their weapons. And in those first hours, that very ability to blind the opponent opened the door for the next phase of the campaign. As the electronic defense layers began to fall into disorder, fifth-generation fighter jets moved into the battlefield. Aircraft such as the F-35 and F-22 flew at high altitude, using their stealth capabilities to approach key targets that enemy radar would struggle to detect. At the same time, Israeli air forces joined the operation with precision strikes targeting air bases, air defense systems, and critical command centers. Higher above the battlefield, B-2 Spirit stealth bombers carried out missions lasting dozens of continuous hours. These were extremely complex operations, with aircraft flying thousands of kilometers, penetrating enemy airspace, and releasing guided bombs capable of penetrating heavily fortified targets. Weapons depots, underground command centers, and strategic missile bases became the next targets. Within the first 24 hours alone, a series of critical military targets had already been struck. It was not a chaotic storm of fire, but a campaign conducted with astonishing precision. Every strike had a clear objective, and every move was designed to gradually weaken Iran's defensive capabilities. And during this phase, the United States achieved the goal that every air campaign seeks from the very beginning: control of the skies. Once key air defense systems began to be neutralized, once radar networks were disrupted and command centers fell into confusion, the battlefield started to enter a new stage, a stage in which the initial precision strikes were no longer the only focus. That was also the moment when America's giant bombers began to appear. The B-52 Stratofortress, an icon of strategic bombing power for more than half a century, was preparing to enter the war, carrying a completely different role. No longer the surgical cuts of the opening phase, but a massive sledgehammer descending upon the skies over Iran. As Iran's key defensive layers began to break down after the precision strikes of the first 24 hours, the atmosphere on the battlefield gradually began to change. The skies that had once been protected by radar, surface-to-air missiles, has remained almost unchanged for decades. Its long fuselage, enormous wings, and 8 jet engines hanging beneath them make it look like a true flying fortress. But what makes it truly intimidating is not its appearance. It's the sheer amount of weapons it can carry. A single B-52 can carry more than 70,000 pounds of weapons, equivalent to over 30 tons of bombs and missiles, from precision-guided JDAM bombs to long-range cruise missiles such as the JAS-SM. All of them can be launched from hundreds of kilometers away. This means the B-52 doesn't need to fly deep into Iranian airspace to cause significant damage. It can operate from a safe distance, release waves of precision weapons, and allow their guidance systems to find their targets. Because of this, once B-52s begin entering the fight, the nature of the military campaign also changes. If the opening phase resembled a surgical operation, removing the most critical components of Iran's defensive system, then this stage begins to look more like a calculated campaign of crushing force. The strikes are no longer aimed at just isolated targets. Instead, they begin focusing on paralyzing the opponent's entire military structure. And within that structure, one objective is considered more important than all the others. It is not just military bases, and it is not merely missile launch sites. The most critical target is the brain that controls the entire fighting system, the command and control network, often referred to as the C2 system. In modern warfare, military strength is not defined solely by the number of weapons a country possesses. A nation may have thousands of missiles, hundreds of radar systems, and multiple layers of air defense. But if all those components cannot work together, that power quickly becomes fragmented and weakened. That is why, in every modern military doctrine, the command and control system, commonly referred to as C2, is considered the brain of the entire war machine. C2 is not just a single building or one isolated base. It is a complex network made up of command centers, communication systems, radar stations, satellites, and the data links that connect all of them together. Through this network, air defense units know when to fire, missile launchers receive launch orders, and forces operating in the air and at sea can coordinate with each other in real time. If that brain is struck, the entire body falls into disorder. That is precisely why, in the next phase of the campaign, the strikes increasingly focused on Iran's C2 network. Critical command centers were marked as targets. Strategic communication facilities were destroyed. Data links connecting radar systems, air defenses, and missile forces began to be cut apart piece by piece. Once these links were broken, the consequences quickly spread across the battlefield. Air defense units began operating with incomplete information. Warnings about incoming aircraft or missiles arrived later than they should, or sometimes did not arrive at all. Military units in different regions could no longer coordinate with the same effectiveness as before. The clearest result of this paralysis appeared within Iran's missile forces. Iran has long been believed to possess a vast arsenal of ballistic missiles, with thousands capable of reaching targets across the region. But once the command network was disrupted, missile launches became scattered and poorly synchronized. Attack waves that had originally been designed to occur in coordinated salvos began to appear far more sporadic and significantly less effective. In other words, rather than attempting to destroy every individual weapon, the air campaign was focused on destroying the ability to control those weapons in the first place. And once the brain of the defensive system begins to shut down, massive war machines like the B-52 can operate with far greater freedom in the skies over the region. But that leads to another intriguing question. In a war that involves some of the most advanced military technologies in the world, why would Washington decide to bring a bomber that is more than 70 years old back to the center of the battlefield? The question many people ask when they see B-52s appearing in the skies over the Middle East seems simple, but it carries a very clear strategic answer. Why, in a modern war where the United States possesses some of the most expensive stealth aircraft and advanced technology in the world, would Washington choose to use a war machine that is more than 70 years old? The answer lies in a combination of efficiency, cost, and time. The B-2 Spirit is truly a technological marvel. It can penetrate some of the most complex air defense systems in the world, slipping deep into enemy territory while remaining almost undetectable. But that very capability also makes the B-2 one of the most expensive aircraft ever built. Each one costs billions of dollars, and the operating cost per flight hour is extraordinarily high. That makes the B-2 the perfect tool for the opening phase of a campaign, when the most critical targets must be destroyed quickly and secretly. But once air defense layers have been penetrated and control of the skies gradually shifts toward the United States, the battlefield begins to demand a different kind of power. No longer isolated precision cuts, but continuous military pressure that can last for days, even weeks. That is exactly where the B-52 comes into its own. This enormous aircraft can carry a larger payload of weapons than most other bombers. It can fly thousands of kilometers, remain in the air for many hours, and repeatedly conduct bombing missions or launch cruise missiles. Most importantly, the operating cost of the B-52 is far lower than that of newer stealth bombers. In a campaign that could last for weeks or even longer, that cost difference becomes extremely important. It allows the United States to maintain a high tempo of attacks without consuming excessive resources for every hour in the air. In other words, if the B-2 is the scalpel used to open the enemy's defensive door, the B-52 is the sledgehammer used to strike again and again after that door has been broken. But the effective appearance of B-52s on the battlefield also reflects another reality. It suggests that one of Iran's most important defensive layers is facing serious problems. That layer is its air defense system, the line of defense that should, in theory, stop massive bombing machines like the B-52 long before they ever reach the skies above the country. One of the biggest problems Iran faces in this conflict lies in the very line of defense that is supposed to protect its skies, the air defense system. In theory, Iran is not a country lacking capability in this area. For many years, Tehran has invested heavily in building a multi-layered air defense network designed to protect major cities, military bases, and especially strategic facilities such as nuclear sites. That network includes several different types of systems. There are Russian-supplied platforms like the S-300, older Soviet-era systems such as the S-200, and domestic projects like the Bavar 373, a long-range air defense system that Iran claims can compete with modern platforms around the world. But Iran's problem is not a lack of weapons. The problem lies in how those weapons work together. In many military analyses, Iran's air defense network is often described as a patchwork system, combining technologies from different eras and different sources. Russian radars, Chinese systems, and domestic platforms are connected in ways that are not entirely synchronized. This limits the ability of air defense units to coordinate effectively, especially when facing modern electronic warfare and cyber attack campaigns. When electronic attacks begin jamming radars, when command centers are disrupted, and when air defense units lose coordination, the entire defensive network starts to develop dangerous gaps. And once those gaps appear, stealth aircraft, cruise missiles, and long-range strike systems can exploit them very effectively. In other words, in modern warfare, air defense is not just about missiles and radar, it is about an entire system of data, command, and coordination. When that system breaks down, even weapons advertised as the most advanced can quickly become far less effective. And it is within that context that Iran's skies begin to open up, not only to stealth aircraft, but also to massive flying fortresses like the B-52, allowing them to continue applying military pressure across the entire battlefield. Looking back at the entire course of the campaign, we begin to realize that what is happening is not just a series of scattered airstrikes. It resembles a plan designed in clearly defined stages. At first came the precision strikes, almost like a surgical operation aimed at cutting the vital nerves of the defensive system. Radars were jammed, command centers were paralyzed, and key bases were struck one after another. Then, once the skies began to tilt in one direction, the campaign shifted into another phase, the phase of overwhelming force. B-52 bombers, carrying enormous payloads of weapons, entered the battlefield not to perform delicate, precise cuts, but to maintain constant pressure, day after day, on the opponent's entire military infrastructure. But perhaps the most notable point is this: the appearance of the B-52 is often not a sign that a campaign is nearing its end. In many past wars, it has instead been a signal that the conflict is entering a longer phase, one where military power, economic pressure, and political calculations begin to merge in shaping the final outcome. Whether this conflict will remain a limited air campaign or evolve into a larger escalation across the region is still a question the entire world is watching closely. And what do you think about the strategy the United States is deploying in this conflict? Does the appearance of the B-52 truly signal a long-term campaign, or is it simply a move meant to send a message of deterrence? Leave your thoughts in the comments so we can discuss it together. And if you're interested in deep, easy-to-understand analysis of global military affairs and geopolitics, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next videos.